And
Begin when you're ready.
yeah, we're recording right now. Cool. So, welcome everybody. We got Brother Dan Freed doing the Little Miami Railroad out of Ohio during the Civil War. A couple of announcements before we get started. One, for those of you that you should probably know it, but if you haven't had a chance, go check out the website that Chad and Austin been working on. I think it looks really good. There's lots of things to play with tabs, and there's a calendar, blah blah. So, and we're always open to input. So Chad's going to be our official webmaster. DC and I have been exploring an LLC status. Initially, we were going to go with 5013C, but it doesn't make any difference given, I mean, it wouldn't matter given the type of organization that we are. So he's looking into some people. I've talked with our buddy Paul Sismaluski, who is an accountant whiz. So with the LLC, we'll have three officers. It'll be DC, me, and I think Paul stepped up to be willing to be treasurer, which is great. So as that starts to unfold, we'll keep you posted. With respect to the convention, I was talking to Chad earlier today, and there's a few of us that are considering maybe doing an Airbnb for about six fellas. So if you're interested in jumping in on that, we were able to see that the rate might be as little as $300 for the week versus a night. So if anybody's interested in that, let us know and we'll continue to pursue that possibility. Chad also mentioned that we might want to look into a trip to the Tennessee Valley Railroad Museum. There's also the Southern Railroad Museum. And I'm going to be following up with Joel, with the coordinators, just to get a sense of where we stand with our room. And Joel's going to keep the group posted as to if anybody wants to display something or present something. We want to get those ducks lined up. I got a new screen, so we'll have a cool screen to do any presentations. So that's the update on my end. Anything from you, DC?
No, I haven't heard back from the attorney yet.
Okay, cool. We should talk tomorrow sometime. If you're around, I'll give you a call.
Okay.
All right, with that, Brother Free, I'd like to turn this over to you and take us on your ride.
Right, can everyone see the presentation?
Sure do.
Yes, we do.
And it
Well
says
done.
Little Miami Railroad,
It do.
and it's orange.
Yep.
We're good.
Hide.
Okay. In the beginning, there was the Erie Canal.
One thing,
Well,
Dan, on your screen, it says stop sharing, and there's a little button that says, or a little line that says hide. Yeah.
Click on
There
it.
you
Yeah.
go.
There you go.
Um, and the Erie Canal opened up basically the Midwest of the United States. The problem with the Erie Canal, of course, was that it froze in winter. And what you see in yellow was basically frozen for a large part of the year.
Wow.
The best alternative, the best workaround after the Erie Canal was opened in the 1830s was to take any goods from what you see in yellow, get it onto the Ohio River, float it down the Ohio River to the Mississippi, down to New Orleans, put it on an ocean-going ship, and ship it back up to the East Coast.
Wow.
A long way around. Nobody was happy with that, and so people tried to figure out a better solution.
Wow.
The solution that some enterprising brains in Ohio came up with was, hey, the shortest route between the Great Lakes system that the Erie Canal feeds into and the Ohio River would be a route north-south across Ohio. And so a plot was hatched to build a railroad from Lake Erie to the Ohio River. Now, what you see on the map, this is a period map. The lines in blue are the Ohio Canal system of the 1830s, but of course they froze too, so that was to no avail. So the idea was we'll build two railroads. One railroad was to start at Lake Erie and Sandusky and build south to Springfield, Ohio, which is situated where the yellow arrow is. That was the Mad River and Lake Erie Railroad. The other railroad was to start in Cincinnati and build north Springfield, running along the course of the Little Miami River, and that became known as the Little Miami Railroad. This was a scheme that was launched around 1835. The Mad River was the first railroad to start building. It was the first railroad in Ohio. Number of firsts. It also bought the first Rogers locomotive, which you see on the left, the Sandusky, which was basically the starting point of the railroad. And that was a locomotive that had already been built, and it had been built to 4-foot 10-inch gauge. The Ohio legislature, in its infinite wisdom, decided that, well, if this was the gauge of the first railroad, we're going to be smart and we're going to mandate that every railroad in Ohio is to be built at a 4-foot 10-inch gauge. So that became known as the Ohio gauge, which you'll hear people talk about. The Little Miami Railroad started, as I said, from Cincinnati, building north. And this gentleman, who I'm sure you all recognize, is the chief engineer, right?
No. Oh, yeah, that's Ormsby.
Ormsby McKnight Mitchell.
Yeah.
The same guy who found himself on the outskirts of Chattanooga in 1862 and was approached by some character named Andrews and convinced him to infiltrate a bunch of Ohio ruffians to Marietta, Georgia. You've probably already heard this one.
Wow, yeah. Wow. How about that? Chief engineer.
So, this basically shows the route of the Little Miami Railroad. It followed the Little Miami as far north as it could, and then it joined Mad River and followed the route of the Mad River up to get to Springfield. You will see about halfway between Columbus, if you look on the left-hand side, the map, Columbus, which we'll enter in the story later, and Cincinnati is a town called Xenia. That was essentially became one of the nerve points of the Little Miami. The original main line is in the light lime green color, and you can see how it follows the course of the river. The Mad River and Lake Erie Railroad I've shown in this light purple pink or whatever. And the importance to Ohio was the fact that it served as a connecting line after, well, let me back up. In 1853, all of the eastern railroads had conquered the Allegheny Mountains, and they connected up with the growing rail network in Ohio. And that kind of pulled the rug out from under the Little Miami Railroad because it was supposed to be this great connector between the Great Lakes and the Ohio River to channel goods down to New Orleans to get them onto boats. And all of a sudden that purpose dried up. So the Little Miami started looking for connecting lines and doing business more like a regular railroad would do. So from top to bottom, highlighted in yellow, there was the Atlantic and Great Western that came in. That was an Erie Railroad satellite, so that was 6-foot broad gauge. It eventually ran just a few miles outside of town, Springfield, and then on into Dayton, and from Dayton down to Cincinnati. The Springfield, Mount Vernon, and Pittsburgh, and also the this line that runs due north from Columbus was called the Cleveland, Columbus, and Cincinnati. Also provided connections that later became part of the New York Central system. Further south, the Cincinnati, Wilmington, and Zanesville was where the Pennsylvania Railroad connected in. That
Wow.
fell under the sway of the Pennsylvania Railroad. And then finally, at the very bottom, Marietta and Cincinnati was later fell under the influence and became part of the B&O system. So you had all four of the eastern major eastern railway systems that were coming in and connecting through to Cincinnati via the Little Miami Railroad. So back up here. The Mad River and Lake Erie Railroad was slow getting off the starting blocks. It was slow getting to Springfield, connecting up. It had financial problems. It never really developed the traffic that had been expected. So while all this is happening and while they're waiting for the connection to be made, what does the board of directors of the Little Miami Railroad do? They decide, well, if we can't connect in Springfield to get all the Lake Erie and Great Lakes traffic, at least we can build a line into the state capital of Columbus and get some revenue going that way. So if you look at the darker green line, they were active in forming and financing or part financing a railroad called the Columbus and Xenia, which was always a quasi-subsidiary of the Little Miami. The Little Miami always operated all the locomotives and all the rolling stock were essentially Little Miami locomotives, and the operation was undertaken by the Little Miami. So the two work hand in glove. They would eventually merge. And since there was no traffic developing, or not much, from the Mad River when it finally got to Springfield, essentially the main line to Springfield became a branch, and branch or the sister railroad, the daughter railroad to Columbus, essentially became the main line. In terms of size, from Cincinnati to Columbus was 119 route miles. So by comparison, the Western Atlantic Railroad is 138 miles route-wise.
Right.
So we're talking, roughly about the same size. So the main two, backbone of this system was the Little Miami and the Columbus and Xenia Railroad. There were other lines, such as the Dayton and Western, which was a line that headed out to the west, trying to get to Indianapolis, ambitions to get to Chicago. But that really hadn't developed by the Civil War, and a lot of that railroad's business, the Western business that was coming into Cincinnati, was funneled off by a competing railroad that ran the west of the Little Miami. So I'm basically going to ignore that because it wasn't of much consequence for the Civil War. It only came into play post-war. On the left, you see a timetable, I think, if I remember right, from 1859. In the middle is an 1860 timetable.
Wow.
And to the right is a timetable from either 1864 or 1865. It's interesting, if you look at the timetable from the 1850s, the Little Miami was operating sleeping cars in the 1850s, which is a little bit for a what was then known as a Western railroad, but for a railroad west of the Alleghenies, that was a fairly advanced feature for the day. It was also in the 1850s interchanging cars, at least I've been able to find with the B&O. B&O joined the Little Miami Railroad at Loveland, a station called Loveland, which was 5 or 10 miles outside Cincinnati. And the B&O cars went straight into Cincinnati. People didn't have to get off the B&O train and get on a Little Miami train. So by the 1850s, we were doing car interchanges with some of the eastern lines, which also was a little ahead of its time. This is what Cincinnati.
I'm sorry, wasn't the B&O 4 foot 8.5?
The B&O were 4 foot 8.5, but the B&O's subsidiary or sister line that it used to access Cincinnati was the Marietta and Cincinnati Railroad, and that was built to 4 foot 10-inch gauge. And if you'll remember, at this point in time, when the B&O hit the Ohio River, there wasn't a bridge over the Ohio River. You had to go across the Ohio River in a ferry boat to get to the railroad on the other side at a point called Marietta, Ohio. And so you get on the train, which was a 4 foot 10-inch. But DC, you raised an interesting question, and what happened to Cleveland when the New York Central Railroad hit the Ohio state line in Cleveland, and you had the Lake Shore and the Cleveland, Columbus, and Cincinnati railroads, which were Ohio gauge. And a lot of the railroads which were interchanging with Ohio, simply the workaround was you made wider treads on your wheels so that you could make up the difference between 4 foot 8.5 and 4 foot 10 inches.
Got it.
This is Cincinnati in 1848, and I put it up for a couple of reasons. This photograph, anyone who's modeling the Civil War should be taking a look at this photograph, and that's why I've put the web link up to it. This, what you see, the panorama, is a digital stitching together of a series of over a dozen daguerreotype photographs, which were taken in 1848.
Wow.
Keep in mind, that's something like, 12 years after photography had even been invented. It was taken across the Ohio River in Kentucky, looking across the river at Cincinnati. It is, my knowledge, and I think that this will be borne out, it is the earliest panoramic photograph of a city in existence on the planet.
Wow.
And if you know anything about daguerreotypes, they recorded detail very, very well. So if you go on and you look at these images that have been digitally scanned, you can enlarge them, and the detail that you can get from these things are amazing.
Mm-hmm.
This, for instance, this building here on the lower, you can read Passenger Depot, Little Miami Railroad. This was the first passenger station in Cincinnati.
Wow.
That was built in the 1840s. These photographs, or the daguerreotypes, I should say, are so detailed that they were able to read the names of the ships that were docked along the Cincinnati waterfront. And because they were able to read the names of the ships that were docked, they could take that, compare it against the newspapers that publish routinely, such and such a ship has docked today, such and such a ship has departed Cincinnati today. Putting
That's
the
cool.
two together, they were able to pinpoint the exact date that the photograph was taken, September 24th, 1848.
Wow.
Because no other steamers were all together in Cincinnati on any day except that day. And from clock hands on a clock and a clock tower of one of the churches, they were able to determine the exact time when the photograph was taken. So it's an amazing photograph. You can get a lot of detail about what a period city looked like.
Wow.
Just by pointing over this. You can spend literally hours looking at the
Right.
digital enlargement of these daguerreotypes.
That's cool.
Sweet.
So originally, even before this station was built, the city fathers would not allow locomotives or the railroad into the city. So the first terminal was at Pendleton, which is about 2 miles outside the city center. It's part of Cincinnati today. And this shows Pendleton circa 1853 when this upper plate was made. You will notice the engine house at the left, which is in a Greek revival fashion,
Yeah.
a rather large depot. Further on, the locomotive sheds and the machine shops. So this is where initially all trains stopped here, and you got off and you took a horse and buggy, or you got into town the last 2 or 3 months, however you please. By the 1840s, by the time that you saw the little train shed in the previous slide, the city fathers had allowed tracks to be laid, but they still wouldn't let locomotives within the city limits.
Mm-hmm.
So a locomotive would uncouple and horses would pull the trains into the terminal.
Mm-hmm.
By 1857, this simply was known as the engine house statement. The building stayed around quite some time. This is a much later view, which gives you a good idea
Oh, yeah.
of the layout of the buildings. And you also notice it was double track. The Little Miami became a fairly prosperous railroad by the 1850s. It was embarking on double tracking, which for a railroad in the Midwest in the 1850s was a fairly rare thing. It was one of the first railroads in the Midwest to convert from strap rail to actual rolled rail.
Mm-hmm.
So a bit of a pioneer in the Midwest. Finally, the city fathers saw the light as far as the utility and the convenience of a railroad. Traffic grew, and there was a second terminal built on the side of the old terminal. And I don't know if you'll note, I should have, let's back up. If you see, here is the location of the Little Miami Railroad depot. If you see where I'm circling with my cursor,
Yes.
note that it's only a block away from the river so that you could ship goods down to the river boats, such as the one you see there. Okay, back to this. This was built on the site of the original Cincinnati City terminus, and this shows what it was like in 1854.
Wow.
There's a good picture of the interior in 1857, by which time the city fathers were like, okay, we'll relent. Locomotives can come in. We agree. It's a convenience. And what this shows is in 1857, they had a large, what they called the Great Railway Celebration, which marked the completion of the Ohio and Mississippi Railroad, which ran from Cincinnati to St. Louis. So 1857 was when we finally had a through rail connection from the East Coast to St. Louis. And this shows the St. Louis delegation arriving in Cincinnati Station and being greeted by the mayor. And you'll also note that the train shed had a transfer table at the end, and you see the locomotive being transferred over to a track to back out of the station.
Wow.
The station continued on. There some further some photos of it, or images you see on the left, what it looked like in 1875.
Yep.
By 1883, a new station had been built. It had been converted for freight use, but it's a fairly typical 1850s train shed.
Looks like it's sitting in water on the right one.
Yeah, during well, the Ohio River flooded, and
Oh.
it was only a block away from the river. So yes, you're seeing a flood view. So let's continue north. Let's start from Cincinnati and go north up towards Springfield and Xenia and Columbus, and you can get some idea, a little bit of a flavor of the kind of country that it ran through. You're always going to see the Little Miami River in a lot of these images because it ran right along the course of the Miami River. Milford was across the river, of course, so you see rather ornate covered bridge. At the far left, there's a building which I suspect was probably a hotel or an inn, and also served as the station. And then two boxcars parked obviously next to the freight station. This is Butterworth Station, which to me is a station which is just begging to be modeled. It was you can find more information on the website that I've listed in the link on the right, which I'd highly recommend for anyone who's researching Ohio railway stations. Butterworth got its name from Henry Thomas Butterworth, who donated land for the railroad to build on in exchange for 2 lifetime passes, and it became sort of his private cult. But by 1859, the annual report indicates that 99 passengers had used it in the course of the year. Water tower up top, waiting room underneath. As simple as that. A very interesting structure.
Yeah, never seen anything like that. Jeez.
Yeah, there's so much flavor and such a period before the standardization of railroads. And you notice it's got even a bit of a higher platform rather than just round. It looks like a dirt platform that's been built, so it's a very unique station. Foster's Crossing, again you see covered bridge and the Little Miami in the background. Foster's Crossing gives you an introduction to the standard Little Miami depot. This obviously is a turn of the century photograph, but the station building is an original Little Miami, and you see some of the signature Little Miami traits, the circular vent in the attic, board and pattern construction, eaves, which you'll see more later. And there's some back and forth as to whether the telegraph bay, which you see on the left, and you'll see it in a lot of these Little Miami stations, whether those were original to the buildings or whether they were later additions. Morrow, Ohio, was relatively important because that was where the Pennsylvania Railroad joined. So you will see it merited a roundhouse here. It had its own station, which is this station here. This would be the Little Miami going off to the left. This would be where the Pennsylvania Railroad came in. Morrow was a town that had ambitions. It's still a small town today. It was named after one of Ohio's governors, who was also a director of the Little Miami Railroad.
Dan, what was that picture taken? The Morrow Depot on the right.
Most of these are from the 1853 book called the Ohio Railroad Guide that I have. So I lifted them out of that book.
Looks like there would be a lot of phone lines on those masts. Those are pretty complex. And then the water stand, the water.
The photo on the right obviously is from like the teens, 1900s.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
The one on the left is from 1853. This is a much later photograph, but the station is still the station, and the station is still there today. This is Morrow in present day. This path is actually what was the right-of-way of the Little Miami.
Wow.
You can see how close it was. It ran right through town.
Wow.
A number of these buildings are period buildings that were there when the Little Miami was operating during the Civil War. So you take away the brick building in the background and the cars, and you still have a fairly good picture of what it looked like. The station has been renovated and gone through a number of changes. The roof has changed a bit. The gable brackets have changed. But today it serves as a brew pub, which would give you an additional reason to do some in-depth field research into the line. And again, that's that path, the left of the station, is what would have been the right-of-way of the Little Miami.
Is the color scheme on that station, is it historically accurate, do you know?
I kind of doubt it. The short answer is I don't know any of the color schemes of any of the stations.
Yes, David?
I'm sorry. Go ahead. Okay, can everyone hear me?
Yep.
Yes, sir.
Okay. If I had to guess, you'll see a station called Yellow Springs, and Yellow Springs Station was rebuilt, and the people of Yellow Springs are pretty historically minded. So I would, if there's any hint, I would think the Yellow Springs Station might be the closest. You'll see a picture of it. Xenia, the first depot again reflects the Greek Revival style that the Little Miami kind of favored in some of its structures, and it was in town. This is a picture of it around 1910 when it had been shuttered and was not in use. But when the Columbus and Xenia, when the line to Columbus was opened up, the junction was actually south of town, and a new bigger station was built there, and local Xenians started referring to this as the Upper Depot. It served that purpose for a couple of years before it was closed and shuttered. This is Xenia, 1848, right after the line to Columbus had been opened. So you see a train in the foreground departing to Columbus. You see a train in the middle ground heading on the original old main line to Springfield. This gives you probably the best idea that we have of what, how Little Miami rolling stock was painted. Locomotives, cab tenders driving the wheels, a Brunswick green Russian iron or plainish boiler, probably straw for the passenger carriages, lined in what looks like maybe a wine color, name boards in wine color, and then over to the far left, we're lucky enough to know that the freight stock was probably painted some shade of gray. The newer depot, you'll note, was much larger. It's shown here white. You'll see that it actually was either built in limestone or maybe brick that was faced in limestone. The depot survived for quite some time. This is a photograph of it in the 1940s. The line where the boxcars are would be the line going to Columbus. The line diverging off to the left would be the line to Springfield. Gives you a little bit of an idea of how the track was arranged. You'll note down here on the left, single line coming up from Cincinnati, and then double track entering the station, double track somewhere past the station. I'm sure not shortly after that it reverted back to single Springfield Yard Gas Works. This is the Dayton and Western line that I mentioned earlier. We're not going to go into that much because not much was going on in the Civil War by way of traffic and an engine house. So fairly simplified track arrangement, got the job done. This is Yellow Springs, and this, I can't say, but if I had to bet, knowing Yellow Springs and how interested the people of Yellow Springs are in history, if anyone did research and was able to figure out how they were painted, this might be the closest. Yellow Springs, actually, the superintendent of roads for the county had to replace a bridge sometime about 20 years ago in the early 2000s, crunched the numbers and decided that a concrete bridge in terms of cost of build and maintenance would not be all that much different from a traditional wooden covered bridge. So the county opted to build the wooden covered bridge, which you can see about half a mile away from the station. The station on the left, this is a photograph from around 1910. The station they tore it down, but one of the locals saved large parts of the station. And the city said, oh, we wish we hadn't have torn it down, went to rebuild it, and that person donated what he'd salvaged back to the station. So we know for a fact that the eave brackets are as it would have been, and some of the other fittings in the station.
The windows, it looks like.
The station. So they did a fairly good job in recreating the station that had once been there.
Nice.
Springfield was on the National Road. On the left-hand side, you see what Springfield looked like in 1830, and you are basically standing in the middle of the National Road looking west. By 1850, you see what Springfield looked like, and that tells you what 20 years of being on a national road and at a railroad interchange can do for a city. It just literally mushroomed in those 2 decades. This is what the Springfield station looked like. Again, you see a lot of the Little Miami features, and a bit of a spoiler alert, the Little Miami did become part of the Pennsylvania Railroad system. This is a map showing what the interchange at Springfield looked like. The Mad River and Lake Erie Railroad that was supposed to come down and be the Great Link has now become part of the Cleveland, Columbus, and Cincinnati Railroad, and people always get these wrong, and they get them mixed up, and I do too. And they've gone through name changes, so sometimes you'll see it listed as the Cincinnati, Columbus, and Cleveland Railroad, sometimes the Cleveland, Cincinnati, and Columbus. Then it became the Cleveland, Columbus, Cincinnati, and Indianapolis Railroad.
Wow.
And the Cleveland, Chicago, the Cleveland, Columbus, Chicago, and St. Louis Railroad, which ultimately became known as the Big Four, so on and so forth. So it's a confusing mess name-wise. The Little Miami is coming in from the south on this big curve. The depot is here. The Triple C, just going to call it for brevity's sake, was the New York Central. Its depot was just across the block. Springfield and Columbus was a short line that the people of Springfield built to get down to the Columbus and Xenia Railroad, so you wouldn't have to go all the way to Xenia and double back to go to Columbus. At the late 1860s, Springfield was kind of the, like I said, a branch line. The traffic interchange in Springfield never really developed, but there still was business that was going down to Cincinnati. You'll see in the map there were stone quarries, there were mills, there were foundries, so on and so forth. So it served that purpose at least. Now we've branched off from Xenia and we're headed on, this is on the Columbus and Xenia Railroad. London is about halfway between Xenia and Columbus, and this is just another scene that just begs to be modeled. There's so many quirky little features. The kind of the Greek Doric water tower windmill structure, the great storage sheds that are nothing more than a roof on beams, and this little ticketing passenger station to the right is just something that, simplicity itself, small town, but very unique. Just the windmills alone give it a lot of visual appeal. West Jefferson is a small town on the approach to Columbus. For some reason, that station was built in brick, whereas most of the stations seem to be wooden board and batten. I have yet to find out why it was built as a brick station. Maybe there was a brickyard close by. That's more digging on my part. You'll notice this is listed as the Panhandle Depot, which reflects the Pennsylvania Railroad influence later on. This was probably the largest bridge over the Big Darby Creek. A typical wooden bridge sheathed in wood, just to give you an idea of one of the bridges on the Little Miami. Again, this is from that 1853 Ohio Railroad Guide, so it gives you an idea. 6-coach train, not bad for 1853 in terms of passenger traffic, if that's in fact an accurate depiction. This is the approach to Columbus over the Scioto River. The covered bridge shows a train going over the Scioto with another. Is that would be a Howe Truss Bridge in the background, the wood bridge, and then the outskirts of Columbus. The large structure on the left is the Ohio Penitentiary. So you see how close the penitentiary was to the rail line. And I'll talk a little bit more about the penitentiary in a future slide. This shows Columbus and what the situation was in Columbus. The Little Miami would be entering Columbus from this direction at the very bottom of the screen. The Cleveland, Columbus, and Cincinnati Railroad would be coming in from this direction. This is another line which really doesn't play much in this story, and the same thing for this line. This whole facility was jointly owned by the Triple C and the Little Miami. So you see the station and various car sheds, machine shop, roundhouse, looks like another freight depot. Fairly typical of the day. Not all that great a station for a state capital, if you ask me. This is what it looked like, just a wooden frame structure. Except for the cupolas on top, it could have been a barn. You see some of the car shops in the background. Presumably the National was maybe a hotel. The street that you see running along this crossing here is Spy Street, which is the major north-south street of Columbus. If you went in the direction of the bottom of the picture, about 7 blocks, you'd be at the state capitol building. So it was that close to the center of the city. So let's turn to rolling stock. This is a locomotive that was built by the Cincinnati Locomotive Works. There, just about a week ago, was posted on YouTube a video about the Cincinnati Locomotive Works, so I won't go much into that. You can check that video out if you want the history. It was known, it went through several name changes, several owners. It originally started out as Harkness. Sometimes you've heard people speak of Harkness locomotives. Moore and Richardson, Moore and Sons. I think there was Harkness and Moore. I'm just going to, for these purposes, I'm just going to call it the Cincinnati Locomotive Works, just to keep things simple. This is a typical Cincinnati locomotive. The pilot, scrap pilot, rather vertical rather than horizontal. Very short wheelbase on the leading truck. And you'll note that the center of the truck is not centered under the center line of the cylinders, but the center line is with the front of the smoke box, which gives it a very forward appearance.
Wow.
This dome, steam dome first, sand dome behind, is a very typical Cincinnati locomotive trademark. The cannon safety valve housing is another signature, and the flat dome tops is archetypal Cincinnati locomotive. I call them inverted saucers because they look like inverted saucers. And you'll see in later photographs that they even took the curve out and they were just making them flat. Here we have a Dutch wagon inside connected. I believe this is a Harkness or Cincinnati loco. It has all the telltale signs. The short wheelbase in the leading drivers, the inverted saucer on the steam dome and the sand dome, same positioning. You can just see the lip of the cannon safety valve, and you can just make out M from Little Miami and X for Xenia Railroad. So I believe this is probably a Harkness locomotive on the Little Miami. If you pay attention to the tenders, you will see that there are all sorts of name combinations on these tenders. Sometimes it was the full LM and CNXRR. Sometimes it just said Little Miami. Sometimes it said LM and X. They went through a number of name combinations for their tenders. Great photo. Another great photo. Again, a telltale Cincinnati locomotive. This is a locomotive named the Reuben Springer. We've got Little Miami Railroad spelled out. All of the telltale Cincinnati Locomotive Works signature items, the domes, cannon safety valve,
Wow.
eyelet, the truck with the center line that is forward. And you'll notice here your valve spindle has a balance tube, which is very much an advanced engineering feature for that period of time. There's a gentleman standing in front of crossbeam here, but you'll be able to see it. And it was, in all, there was a moderate amount of decoration. There was, not as much as you'd expect. There's a little gingerbread on the cab panels, some lining on the tender, what you would expect on the headlight. But go take a look at this area in the next photograph. You'll see that they actually did some pinstriping and such. This is at Foster's Crossing locomotive, the Reuben Springer. Interesting railroad crossing. This was in pre-crossbuck days. So this was what the railroad crossing signs looked like. You have a baggage car, which is made of matchboard, horizontal rather than vertical. And interesting spring. Springing to the tender trucks.
Dan, you said a railroad sign? I mean, a crossing sign?
Yeah, here. Do you see where I'm circling in the
Oh,
in the
wow.
haze?
Yes. Interesting.
Uh, and then there are actually two. I don't know if you can see them. Two angled bars that say "Beware of the cars."
Oh, man. Oh.
This again, another Cincinnati Loco Works locomotive, the Columbus, flat top domes, cannon safety valve, another inside cylinder. The Columbus was originally built as a 460 and was converted uh, to an 060 in the shop. It's interesting that the Little Miami in the 1840s had one or two Baldwin flexible truck locomotives, the 080s, for a while. They were later converted to 6 driving wheel locomotives, so they evidently weren't happy with the performance. And it's also interesting if you go back to the annual reports. By 1855, the Little Miami had 39 locomotives on its roster, 12 of which were 460s. That's 31% of the fleet were 460s, which is a little surprising for a railroad in 1855. You tend to think that there was nothing but 440s running around on railroads at that point in time, but 31%. Not bad for a line that was 120 miles long. Little Miami was one of the first in Ohio to convert to coal burning, which it did in the midst of the Civil War. I think this is a later locomotive. I haven't been able to identify it. It looks Baldwin to me. There were a number of Baldwin locomotives on the Little Miami, so I wouldn't be surprised. But this gives a modeler a chance to model both wood burning and coal burning and wood rigs and pulse aging points on a Civil War railroad, which is kind of nifty. Maybe you've seen this photograph. This is probably the best known photograph of the Little Miami. Obviously, it shows Xenia Station in 1865. This is actually photographed in the Smithsonian. The locomotive is the Dr. Goodale. Again, another classic Cincinnati locomotive. You can tell by the telltale pilot, the truck, the forward positioning of the center pin for the truck. This tender has the full LM and CNXRR the initials on the side. Passenger cars are interesting. You have one passenger car with matchboard siding. The passenger car in the rear must be a little older and is paneled, and a typical baggage car. Very interesting photograph. You can spend a lot of time going over some of the details. You can just barely see another locomotive at the far left, which it's one of those things where you wish the photograph would have incorporated a little more of it. This is the William Dennison, again another telltale Ohio Cincinnati locomotive. You can tell by the stack this is after it had been converted to burning coal. William Dennison was the governor of Ohio, so the name Dennison pops up a lot in Little Miami lore. The occasion or the decoration was the centennial on July 4th, 1876. So you get to see what the celebrations looked like then. So let's get to the actual war. This boils down to troops, supplies, requisitions, and logistics. What you see here is a newspaper. I'm not sure where, I can't remember where this was from, maybe Frank Leslie's or one of the illustrated newspapers, of troops in training to go down. And these must be volunteers. None of them are in uniform. They're all carrying their own rifles. Here you see Cincinnati, Columbus, and Cleveland, which is a little confusing. And you see XRR, so you see the cars are being used, requisitioned for these troop trains shared. No indication where this was or whether this is a staged screen, a staged image by the illustrator, but it gives you some flavor of what things look like as recruits were off to the war.
Mm.
Little Miami, a lot of it revolved around two camps. Camp Chase was in Columbus, and it was very close to the railroad right-of-way. It served as recruitment, served as some training, and also a prisoner of war camp was there.
Right.
The prisoner of war camp is in the far left upper corner. This walled area here was the prisoner of war camp. This was a drill ground.
Right.
Camp Chase, I assume, was named after Salmon Chase from Lincoln's cabinet. Camp Dennison, again named after the Governor Dennison, was just north of Cincinnati. You can see the railroad passed right through the middle of it. Initially, the oldest part of the camp was the left of the right-of-way in this image. But you can just see the camp expanded during the war. You can see more tents being put up over here. And by the end of the war, the camp had about doubled in size, and the railroad ran right down through the middle. It became a major training camp for troops in the West. It was a point of demarcation for troops going anywhere in the Western theater. As the war progressed and battles such as Shiloh and Corinth and wounded men started coming back, it became a hospital, and it also became a supply depot. So it was a very important camp for the Western theater in the war. And as I say, it was just north of Cincinnati. Another view of Camp Dennison, you can see how the tents were arranged. And yet another view of Camp Dennison. And by this point, it looks as though if this woodcut is accurate and to be believed, that double tracking had gone as far north as Camp Dennison. And an interesting picture I found with some of the fresh recruits, how they looked when they first showed up training at camp.
I love it.
Camp Dennison was so widely used for training. So many recruits were passed through there that one of the settlers in Cincinnati actually had envelopes, Camp Dennison, printed. And this is one of the surviving envelopes where you see the camp and the railroad track in the lower right-hand corner. Recruits could buy these envelopes and use them to mail their letters to the folks back home.
Is that an example? Sorry, is that an example of troop training where he's targeting a dummy?
Or maybe the colonel or the camp commandant. I'm not sure on that.
Okay.
You'd have to ask, but there are obviously some troops being drilled in the background. This small stone house was there at Camp Dennison. This is the Camp Dennison site today, and that houses the Camp Dennison Museum. So that can be visited. There are a number of other structures to be seen. Camp Chase, these are some views of the prisoner of war camp, which would make for a very interesting structure. They're pretty much in agreement as to how it was built, so it's interesting to see the bracing structure, the catwalk along the outer perimeter, and the guards lookout postings, and the barracks housing.
Wow.
Here's another view of the interior of what the prisoner of war camp at Camp Chase looked like. Looks pretty bleak, but compared to some of the photographs of Libby or Andersonville, not too bad. 4 Mile House, the image to the right, was an old poaching inn that served as the base headquarters for Camp Chase. So you get a little bit of an idea how these things, or how these camps morphed. They found some ground. They rented or commandeered or bought, possibly, although I kind of doubt that, some of the buildings that were already there, and put them into service.
Mm-hmm.
So troop movements, there was movements all along the line from any connecting lines. Cincinnati and St. Louis were really the two major staging points for the Western Theater, at least the two major ones that I know of. So there was constant traffic for the Little Miami. Oh, which reminds me, in the annual reports of 1860, the board of directors were moaning about how the war had, and they were afraid it was going to affect revenues and profits were going to be down because the steamboat traffic to the south was going to be cut off. And then in the annual reports of 1865, they're crowing about how they had met every demand that had been placed on them, and they had received a special commendation from the Superintendent of Rail Transportation of the United States government.
Mm-hmm.
And then by the 1866 annual report, they were ballyhooing and moaning the fact that they anticipated that revenues and profits would be down this year because of the loss of, quote, military transportation.
Funny.
You just can't win. Human nature is what it is, right? General Buell messed with the railroad in 1862 when he requisitioned, quote, all surplus freight cars, which threw the line, which the board of directors was thrown into a tizzy. The movement of the 11th and 12th Corps from Virginia to Chattanooga, which is pretty well known, did not take place over the Little Miami, but the Little Miami had to lend rolling stock for the transport. And in 1865, when Schofield's Corps was transferred back east, the Little Miami did transfer troops on that occasion, and you see the numbers for that. The requisitioning of stock, rolling stock, got so bad that towards the later stages of the war, the Little Miami prevailed upon then former Governor Dennison to go to Washington, D.C. As what we would today call lobbyists, to try and buttonhole some officials and get them to lay off requisitioning stock from the Little Miami. There's a reference in Thomas Tabor's work to the locomotive Jupiter being sold to the U.S. Military Railroad, and I wanted to talk a little bit about that. Don't take that on face value. Take that with a healthy grain of salt. I have seen online, I think it's the 1866 annual report, which lists a locomotive called Jupiter, but the page was improperly scanned, so I don't know whether it was the Jupiter that is intended to be referred to in the Tabor books. So that's a loose end that bears further. You need to run that to ground. see, I suppose there's a possibility that it could have been returned to the Little Miami later, but that's don't know. We recognize the gentleman on the left. No response. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Quiet as church mice. This is John Hunt Morgan. Have we all heard of the Morgan raid? That's not. Well, being in Ohio, when
Yes.
you've heard of the Morgan raid, I can remember my great-grandmother talking about the Morgan's Raiders. And she would have heard about that probably from her mother or father, who basically, were living in panic during the Morgan raid. John Hunt Morgan, Confederate cavalry general, was given the authorization to do a little skirmish across into Indiana. I forget who his superior was. He didn't let the superior know, but he decided that he was going to turn this into a grand raid. So he took his troops, his cavalry, across the Ohio and Indiana. They headed east, basically paralleling the Ohio River across southern Indiana. They crossed into Ohio just north of Cincinnati. They had encountered any number of skirmishes across Indiana. Their numbers were dwindling by the time they got to Ohio. They created panic in Cincinnati. The governor called out the National Guard. The alarms were sounded. The citizenry was up in arms. The newspapers were, doing what they do best. But Morgan didn't have the strength at that point to actually threaten Cincinnati. He moved to the north of the city, heading east. He would, by this point in time, of course, everyone and anyone who had either a commission in the Army or was a volunteer or was in the Ohio militia was on his trail. So he was on the run and didn't really have much time. He didn't even attempt to do any damage to Cincinnati. Plus you had Camp Dennison, which I said was just to the north of Cincinnati, full of recruits, so there was not much he could do. What he was able to do, of course, he was headed east, and inevitably he had to cross the Little Miami Railroad. His force tried wedging ties on the track at a location called Porter's Mill. Easily taken care of. They tried burning the Little Miami Bridge at a town called Miamiville, but they were repulsed. The only notable damage they did to the Little Miami Railroad was an ambush of the regular accommodation train that was transporting cavalry and passengers in the vicinity of Miamiville, where they built an obstruction on the track which wrecked the locomotive named John Kilgore, killed the fireman, seriously wounded the engineer, and they were able to burn 4 of the passenger cars. Morgan continued on eastward, roughly paralleling the course of the Ohio River. The reason for that, the local militia, whatever troops could be mustered from the Federal Army, were in hot pursuit, and Morgan was essentially trying to get to the next closest place where he could take his troops safely across the Ohio River. But every time he got there, he found out that the Bluecoats had blocked that crossing, so he would head further east in hopes of the next crossing. The next crossing, the same thing happened, and on, till he got within range of Wheeling, West Virginia, when he was finally captured and surrendered. He was seen as such a threat. Most of his troop was sent to the Camp Chase prisoner of war camp, but Morgan and his higher officers were seen as such a risk and such a threat that they were put in the Ohio Penitentiary, which again you see in the photograph.
Wow.
While he was in prison, Morgan befriended one of the prison guards and convinced him that he liked to read railroad schedules, and the prison guard go out and buy one of the books, one of the like the Appleton's Guide or the Official Railroad, where you could like read all of the timetables of the New York Central and the Pennsylvania Railroad, and guard was possibly the stupidest prison guard of the century, did him the favor and bought him the railroad guide. So with the schedule of the Little Miami in his hands,
I love it.
Morgan and his fellow officers, with a couple of penknives, started building a tunnel from an air shaft that ran under the floor of their cells, completed the tunnel, and presumably on a dark night, escaped, went a mile and a half from the penitentiary that you saw to the Little Miami Railroad, whereupon he timed it just right, bought a ticket for a night express, headed to Cincinnati, and boarded the train.
That's great.
We have time. I'll read a little excerpt from a Columbus Dispatch article that gives a little bit of a color to this escapade. It reads, "The Confederates emerged from the tunnel, quickly scaled the outer wall, and scattered. Captain Henry Hines, one of the escapees, left a note for, quote, the faithful and vigilant Warden N. Marion, saying the prisoners had worked on the tunnel for 16 days with only 2 small knives as tools. Oh. Quote, patience may be bitter, but the fruit is sweet, Hines wrote." Morgan and Captain John Asselman split off from the main band of escapees, walked a quarter mile in the rain to the Columbus train station, and took the 12:05 a.m. train to Cincinnati. Asselman recounted in his autobiography, quote, "I purchased 2 tickets for Cincinnati and entered the car by the side of a federal major in uniform. And I sat down on a seat immediately in the rear. General Morgan entered into conversation with the major. As the train passed near the prison wall where we had descended, the major remarked to General Morgan, 'There is where the Reverend General Morgan and his officers are put for safekeeping.' The general replied, 'Keep him as safe as he is now.'"
I love it. Jeez. Wow. What a feat.
So, a little bit of revenue and line side industries, and a taste of some of the representative buildings that were found along the line of the Little Miami. This is from the 1862 annual report. You can see they were hauling just about everything: clover seed, beef and pork, whiskey, flour, tobacco, cotton, butter, cheese, milk, staves, barrels, hogs, horses, cattle, sheep, omnibuses, wagons, buggies, plows and corn drills, cultivators, ship stuff, railroad iron, pig iron. So it was quite an active line for a line that was only 120 miles south, or long.
Crazy.
Some of the other, I've lost my train of thought now. Some of the other industries that were along the line, of course, steamboats and steamboat supporting industries, Chandler Shipbuilding, they would have all been ordering goods that would have come down. Again, there were locomotive builders, Harkness and Moore and Niles. Just south of Yellow Springs was a gunpowder factory known as King's Powder Company. Interesting thing about gunpowder is that the wood of willow trees was somehow highly sought after. It was an important component of gunpowder. So you always tried to locate your gunpowder factory close to a source of willow trees. The King's Powder Company had numerous explosions. You can imagine it was providing gunpowder that went down to Cincinnati to support the Union troops. The station that was beside the King's Powder Company was named Goes, and that was after one of the gentlemen who had donated land to the Little Miami for the right-of-way. His name was Goes, but the locals joked that it was named Goes because it meant there she goes every time the King's Powder Company had an explosion.
Cool.
Springfield was known for agricultural instruments, plows, seed drills. There was also a stone quarry, so lime and kilns. Xenia had a woolen mill, which was known as the Xenia Factory. Blankets, which obviously would have made their way south to Cincinnati to probably the quartermaster's stores at Camp Dennison. And there was an incipient twine industry that was getting up and started by the Civil War. Interesting to note that the Little Miami had gross revenue in 1860 exceeding $1 million.
Remarkable.
Which gave it, people were calling it the Model Railroad of the West. And by 1865, that was $2.5 million. To put that in perspective, $1 million in revenue would qualify a railroad as a Class 1 railroad under the ICC and the Federal Railroad Administration up until 1956. Wow. So you can see that by 1860 standards, the Little Miami was a very profitable line.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, let's take a look at some of the buildings that were found in and around or close by the Little Miami to give you a little bit of a flavor, put it in context. The Niles Locomotive Works, I wasn't able to find a picture of the Niles locomotive, but this is the Niles factory. You can see the Locomotive Works built to the rear of the main complex. The main complex would have been devoted to steamboat boilers, steamboat pistons, machinery, that sort of thing. And you'll note one of the Ohio canals visible in the photograph. This is the King's Powder Company that we've talked about, Miami Powder Company, and Ghost Station is at the far right. The King Powder Company later moved farther south and to a place that became known as King's Mills. There is a theme park built there now called King's Mills. And then it later moved further south to Cincinnati, where it had whether it was a son or someone who had just bought the company, but the gentleman was named Peters, and Peter shotgun shells are still produced today as part of Remington Firearms.
Wow.
This is what's left of the powder works today. You can see this would have been the Little Miami Railroad. I can remember as a kid my grandparents calling this match factory, the old abandoned match factory. So even though King Powder Company had moved south, the next company that moved in was pretty much true to the inflammable nature of what was made there. This is the Golden Lamb in Lebanon, which is just off the Little Miami, a little town called Lebanon. It's been in continuous operation since 1803. Gives you a little flavor of what by 1803 standards, a fairly large-scale inn and tavern would be. You can still rent a room and get a meal there today. The Waldschmidt House is another one of the houses that you can see at Camp Dennison. You'll note houses in Ohio oftentimes were either 4-bay or 5-bay like this is, whereas in the East it was a little more common to see 3-bay houses. So that's a little bit of the architectural difference between Ohio and the East. I guess maybe you had a little more land to spare in Ohio in the 1860s, so you could build houses a little bigger. This is the Pennsylvania House Inn and Hotel in Springfield. It was built in 1822 at a point where the National Road went due west, but there was a turnpike going to Dayton, Ohio that headed southwest, and this was built right where the two roads separated. So this is essentially the 1822 equivalent of a motel that was built at the interchange point between two freeways. That's would be the National Road that you see right in front of it as it is today, and there is still preserved one of the original milepost markers for the National Road. Very typical of the buildings that you would have seen in Ohio during the Civil War along the Little Miami right-of-way. Ursula House, Ohio architecture was largely influenced by Pennsylvania. This is an example of a Pennsylvania Dutch bank house, which is fairly common in Ohio too. They were built in the side of the hill, so the front of the house would be 2 stories, but if you went around the back, you might find that the upper floor was essentially the ground floor for the rear because it was built in the side of the house. And this is at George Rogers State Park, which is close to the location of the Revolutionary War battlegrounds for the Battle of Pickaway, which I think was the largest battle west of the Alleghenies in the Revolutionary War. So, finally, a railroad that used the Little Miami but didn't pay a cent for the usage, and that's the Underground Railroad.
Wow.
If you look at this map, to the left, you see the main routes of the Underground Railroad that were used. And if you see probably the largest route is this route that went through Ohio. And if you look, you will see that it fairly well conformed with the route of the Little Miami Railroad. And this makes a certain amount of sense. It would have made sense to travel by night if you were riding on the Underground Railroad. And you would want to stay off the roads of the day at night to avoid detection. And it made sense to follow the railroad line itself, because you weren't likely to run into people on horseback or on foot who were on the roads at night, who you may or may not hear. You're certainly going to be aware of the sound of an approaching train and able to take cover and hide. So the Little Miami did double service as a railroad during the Civil War.
Fascinating.
And this is a representative station on the Underground Railroad in Springfield. George and Sarah Gammon were African Americans, freedmen as they were called, who built this house in 1850. They hid people in the cellar. You can just see one of the cellar ventilators or ventilation light windows in the foundation. And that house has now been converted to a museum. They had a son named Charles Gammon. he volunteered for, excuse me, the 54th Massachusetts, and was killed in action at Fort Wagner. So if any of you have ever seen the movie Glory, he was one of the men that was in the assault.
Wow.
That pretty much brings us to the end of the Civil War, and it also pretty much brings us to the end of the Little Miami Railroad as a separate entity. In 1870, the traffic patterns were clearly moving east-west. The Little Miami ran from the southwest to the northeast, from Cincinnati to Columbus. It was seeing the handwriting on the wall, and it decided the best thing to do was to cut a deal and lease the line to the Pennsylvania Railroad, which it did. It continued on as part of the Pennsylvania Railroad system up until the Conrail days. This shows a station that was built in Cincinnati in the 1880s by the Pennsylvania Railroad. That station building is here. This is the new Cincinnati station. And here you see what was the old passenger depot of the Little Miami Railroad. So with that, we'll conclude the presentation, and we'll see if we have any questions.
Well, number one, just a comment. The research you did is remarkable, unbelievable. It's very detailed. And the second comment is, what I like about this is there's, other than, I don't know of anybody that's doing a northern line like so locked, like above the Mason-Dixon as this, which is, like I think you said, Dan, this is definitely something that anybody that's interested in doing a model railroad, I mean, with all the information that's available and the role that it played, and even for operational possibilities, this is a plum. This is a nice choice. Well done. I have no questions, though. Thank you.
Dan, again, thank you, as Tom said. I just wanted to say that this is one of the best presentations, the most prepared that I have seen in this group. And it is also one of the reasons that I was interested in forming the group, because you're dealing with a railroad other than the Western Atlantic, the B&O, or the U.S. military railroad, and it's just fantastic. So I just want to reiterate, thank you. And as a side note, when we talk about the problems with the canal systems, Wife Rebecca's father used to ride his motorcycle up and down the Erie Canal in the winter up there in New York. It was just a frozen roadway.
Ice skating.
Probably canal.
Canal, yeah.
Cool. Good. Any other comments, questions? Anything unrelated to the presentation?
Thank you, Joel, for mentioning that. Yes, I think I may have mentioned it earlier, but there is a thin volume that John White wrote called Cincinnati Locomotive Builders. And the YouTube vid basically encapsulated the John White book. But for anyone who's interested, it's well worth getting your hands on a copy. And Austin forwarded this image. Cincinnati locomotives, this just sort of as an epilogue to all of this, did get exported to Western railroads. And this is a Cincinnati Locomotive Works locomotive.
Wow.
That was the first locomotive in the state of Arkansas. So that's near and dear to Austin's heart. So with that, I have no further blathering or pictures.
Charlie, do you have I think Charlie had a question or a comment. No?
No, well, I don't have a question, but I tell you that was just a fabulous presentation. I went online just doing a little research about what you might be saying tonight. I had no idea just how wonderful your research is, but it is a fascinating railroad line to think about. Documentation, the photos, your timetables. It's really pretty rich.
There's a fair amount of information available, and to be honest, I haven't scratched the surface of, for instance, going to the Ohio Historical Society in Columbus to see what they may have to have. But the thing that got me started is that, probably about 20 years ago, I found a bound copy of their annual reports on eBay and picked it up. And that's what got me hooked on doing a little more research on the railroad. So it's fun stuff for someone who likes digging around in dusty old books.
That at least that one, I think the one photo we had of Columbus, you were underwhelmed by that photo. I was overwhelmed. It's got some beautiful three-way stub, turnouts, and kind of a unconventional harp stand. I mean, at least as far as southern lines go.
That's interesting. I'm underwhelmed by the station depot itself. For a state capitol, it's just basically a wooden barn.
But that would be easier to model, a wooden structure rather than.
Well, to Charlie's point, that's the thing that always astounds me is I will have looked at a photograph a dozen or so times, and somebody will point something out in the photo I didn't even look at, like the harp stands or a configuration of a track or some little detail in there. It's like, ooh, that's a sweet piece of data. Yeah, and I particularly like that panoramic view of all those photos that were stitched together. And again, the detail, man, if you were doing a river scene, just a piece of that is rich.
That's another aspect of the Little Miami that's interesting. You get the chance to model a river scene with steamboats if you like steamboats.
Right.
So you get a little bit of everything. Plus, how many railroads have a gunpowder factory along the line?
Really? That's yeah.
Hey, for all you without a good excuse for not going to this year's convention, we learned about willow wood, that it makes the best charcoal. We learned that from the DuPont Gunpowder Works.
When he was talking about that, I thought, man, didn't we see or hear something about that down in Delaware? Sure enough, Charlie. Yep.
Dan, are you going to be able to go to the convention this summer?
I'm hoping so, yeah.
Cool.
You said yes?
I said I'm hoping so.
I can't hear. Said yes?
That's sort of a yes.
You should consider doing this presentation at the convention. It's just great quality.
Wow, look, we have Austin that just showed up, and Mr. Ed. Oh my God, man, how you been? It's been a long time.
Yes, it has. I would have to say the good news is I'm no longer working second shift.
That's good news.
Bad news is I'm unemployed.
Oh.
So that's why I'm here. Basically, it's one of those things I'm starting to remember all the different things that I used to do before I was working second shift. But
well, you got some more time for model railroading, for whatever that's worth.
Yeah. I basically been spending the week right now doing all the legal things, signing up for unemployment.
Oh yeah.
Signing up for the Department of Labor, helping me
Right.
find a job and all that fun stuff, and
Well, good luck with that.
trying to figure out what I want to do in life.
Yeah, yeah. Well, as long as you can stick around with us once in a while, that's great. And Austin, you're out in Colorado.
Yeah. But I've been listening the whole time. We just got to the hotel room so I can jump on. I just want to say that was fantastic, and I knew it was going to be thoroughly detailed. And I know at least a good section of us are going to be are really enjoying that process.
Yeah, well done.
Thank you.
Cool. All right, fellas. Anything else? I'm going to stop the recording. Cool. Let's see.
Go ahead, Charlie.